I'm here with Danielle Shroyer, author, speaker, blogger, and former pastor. Danielle also served as one of our speakers at the inaugural Buechner Writers Workshop at Princeton Theological Seminary. Thank you, Danielle, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
As you know, Frederick Buechner will soon be turning 90 years old. Is there anything you would like to wish him for this great milestone?
Yes. Mr. Buechner, happy birthday, and thank you. Deepest thanks for doing the courageous work of writing honestly so that other people can see the truth of things. Thank you for your willingness to be vulnerable and to tell us what we need to hear, even when it stings a little. Thank you for preaching a Jesus of skin and bones and heart and head, and with such an obviously faithful heart while you do it. As someone who loves books more than anything, and as someone who loves beautifully written books more than words could ever say, thank you for offering into this world a staggering number of truly beautiful books. I consider so many of your books my soul friends, and I hope and pray that you feel and know the goodness and the power of that legacy that you leave for us and for so many readers to come. So thank you, and happy birthday.
Next, can you tell me how you first learned about his writing?
I discovered Frederick Buechner my freshman year of college. I was having a conversation with a friend. I don't remember what we were talking about, but she brought up the book Wishful Thinking. And I was so enamored, not only with the whatever quote that she said at the time, but also with the idea of the book, that someone would take these words, many of them religiously loaded, and just sort of put a laser onto them and try to get at the heart of things. And I very soon after that sought out the book and read it and immediately felt the same way that I think so many people have felt and do feel when they read him. Just this instant soul connection. Like, this person gets it. They understand what faith means, and they're approaching faith in a way that is so deeply resonant with me. And this person clearly knows what my soul believes and what my soul longs for, and says it with just compellingly beautiful sentences. And so I became a very quick fan and rapidly started reading all the stuff that I had missed up until then. Oh gosh. Well, I've spent at this point more years of my life as a pastor than as a full-time writer. And so I have to say, I can't tell you how grateful I am for his sermons. How fantastic are his sermons? They're the best for so many reasons. He has this ability to take a scriptural text and present it in a way that makes you feel immediately connected to it, while at the same time feeling like it's somehow still very foreign and alien to the way that you understand things. And then he connects that to just the complexity of human life and human experience. That is exactly what sermons are supposed to do. I mean, if you sat in any preaching class from here to the end of wherever, that's what they tell us to do every week. And so I consider his sermons kind of this gold standard. Like, this is what you ought to do with the scriptural text. And he does that so incredibly well. So I spent most of my time as a pastor with young adults and young professionals, and that's a really tough crowd. It's hard to get them to listen. It's near impossible to get them to stay listening and keep their attention. And they have an incredibly honed radar for BS. And so it's a tough crowd. And I remember reading so many of his sermons, especially in Secrets in the Dark, his compilation, and I could just picture all of those Lawrenceville students sitting there just with rapt attention on every word that he was saying. And not only them, of course, but people of all ages. It's just hard not to sit down and want to hear exactly what's coming next when Buechner brings us on a journey through a sermon. So, gosh, yeah, that's the gold standard. That's the gold standard. A Buechner sermon. That would be something to reach. So, it's influenced it just in the hopes that that's the way I want to communicate things. And I appreciate all of his beautiful and glorious examples of that.
Which of his books today has meant the most to you?
I do love all of his books, but this is not a hard question for me. My favorite is Telling the Truth. The Gospel is Tragedy, Comedy, and Fairy Tale. And the strange thing is, I somehow missed that book until I had graduated seminary. So when I came across it, I was already serving as a pastor, and I love anything related to literature. So just the idea of comparing the gospel to 3 different forms of literature sounded amazing. And then I read it, and oh my goodness, that book undid me. It still does. I can't possibly read it and not just feel a little bit emotionally drained afterward. Just every single word in that book. It's like, it's not even enough to say that it resonated with me or that I connected with it. It's like a huge gong was placed in my chest, and every word of that book just gets gonged with a big mallet. It just sort of reverberates through my being. I can't even think of how to describe how much I love that book. I actually ended up doing a sermon series on it. We actually did discussions in my church, and so we did 3 weeks of discussions on the gospel as tragedy, comedy, and fairy tale. And at the beginning of that series, I asked people, okay, if you had to pick one now, which one would you say that it is and why? And we had such compelling and thoughtful conversations around just the complexity of the gospel and the way that story speaks to us through that book. So yeah, that's the one that I probably go back to and reread more than almost anything else. It's one of my favorite, not just Buechner books, but it's just one of my favorite books of all time.
Has Mr. Buechner's work inspired any of your own writing or your own sermons?
That's a tricky question. First of all, of course it has. That being said, gosh, maybe in 30 years or something, if someone says that they can tell that I've been influenced by Buechner, what an amazing accomplishment that would be. That would be an incredible compliment as well. But I guess in the sense of how he's inspired my work, I would say most directly he's inspired my sense of vocation and call, which has, of course, spanned both my time as a pastor and now as a writer. It just takes so much courage to speak honestly about faith and to be just to the point about how much you believe it, how crazy it is, and yet you're getting up every morning choosing to believe this crazy thing. And then it takes courage to talk about just the fragility of being human and how those two things are always crashing and intersecting and getting all woven up together and tangled. And I always hope to speak with that kind of honesty and vulnerability in whatever form that I'm writing. And so I think most of all, I have looked to him as just a true voice, like a voice of actual faithful integrity. This is what it means to be a human person who believes in this crazy God. So when I feel like I'm losing my footing on that a little bit, or I feel like I'm getting a little unclear about what that's supposed to look like or sound like, I'll pick up a Buechner book, and it's, okay, this is a true north of, okay, this person understood it, so I have to figure out my own way of living into that kind of sort of faithful, honest integrity.
What influence would you say that Mr. Buechner has had on Christianity and the world at large?
Oh, I think Frederick Buechner lends Christianity a voice of integrity and legitimacy. Legitimacy specifically, and there's really not a way to underestimate that. Those who are placed in front of the TV camera are given bylines in newspaper articles that are speaking from places of privilege and power and maybe needing to keep those places, and to have a voice in that mix of Christian faith that is just so doggedly faithful and human. Yeah, I think that provides such legitimacy. And I have so many agnostic and atheist friends who just love Buechner. They love him. they don't follow him all the way to saying, oh yeah, I'm going to confess Jesus as Lord, but they can't not read his books and say, oh yeah, for this person, faith is so real, and it's and I respect it. Not just like, oh, I see that you agree differently than me, but I mean, there's just deep respect for the way in which he holds that belief with honesty. And gosh, I think we need a lot of that. I think the church could use a lot of voices that seem that legitimate and that come across as that legitimate. So for that, I'm certainly grateful. That is really hard, because words like, beauty and honesty, authenticity, faithfulness, truthfulness, laser-like intensity, all those things I want to say. But I guess the thing that maybe the phrase that I would come up with that encompasses all of those things would be gut check true. When you read Frederick Buechner, it's gut check true what you experience. It's like when you're reading him, there's this little hook that gets into your gut and sort of tugs at you. And sometimes it feels great, like you're getting lifted up into the heavens, and sometimes it feels convicting, and sometimes it feels just, yes, this human understands that sadness that I have as well. But in all of those cases, it feels true. It feels gut check true.